This thirst for conversations about social responsibility is evident across the university system, in classes and in courtyards, in dorm rooms, and in community forums. So both in a spiritual and scholarly context, millennials are increasingly interested in meaning in their career, and they understand, more than any other generation before them, that true happiness and fulfillment only will happen through the service of others. Now, a great Sufi poet once said that when we speak from our hearts, all our masks come down. And indeed, millennials are connected to their hearts and their feelings in a way that my generation, Generation Y, never was. I believe that they are ready to tell new stories, to develop new narratives, to think creatively and out of the box about some of the most pressing conflicts that they will face when they come into power. As millennials continue to think about how they can shape the world and promote a culture of peace, service, and reconciliation, the modern research university will play a critical role in their development and in their transformation. Through the modern research university, millennials will be connected to the world around them. They will raise their global literacy, they will increase their intercultural competence, they will expand their awareness of global interdependency. And in all these ways, they will embody what it means to be truly global citizens. In doing so, they will foster their own culture of peace, which will largely be shaped by their university experiences. I, for one, am excited to see how those experiences play out when millennials finally come into positions of power and actively engage with building a more just and peaceful world. And I think all of you will be as excited to see this play out as I am. So that being said, I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and to share these thoughts with you. And let's open it up for any questions, comments, or observations you might have.
Okay, so
I think the future is really in sort of a postmodern approach to education. Postmodernism has allowed us to deconstruct these larger meta-narratives about which culture or civilization is better, which religion or civilization is better, these narratives that were part and parcel of a colonial experience. Now that we're in a postmodern era, we realize how important the subaltern, the subjective are, the micro-narratives that all of us tell about our own lives. And I think that pedagogy actually is beginning to reflect that approach. So I think that you're absolutely right to talk about interdisciplinarity. The more interdisciplinary, what's the word? Yeah, exactly. The more a university becomes multidisciplinary, the more students will be able to learn from each other and innovate. I think really the beautiful thing about crossing disciplinary boundaries from an educational point of view is that that's where innovation happens. Innovation doesn't happen when the physicist does physics. Innovation happens when the poet does physics. Innovation happens when the physicist writes poetry. That's where innovation happens, where people take one body of knowledge and they apply it to another field. And when we have that kind of innovation, then we can start having we can start creating a culture, I think, where people respect one another, engage with one another, understand one another, and produce things that are important. What I'm inspired by is how much our students produce. When I was in college, we were taught to think critically. We were critics. We weren't producers. We were cultural critics. Now these students are cultural producers. They're making their own iApps. One of my students is 18 years old. He has raised $500,000 to build soccer fields in Africa. Why? Well, the World Cup is happening in South Africa this year, and what he found is when you build a school, when you build a soccer field at a school, kids will go to school. So he's built 3 or 4 soccer fields already around Africa, and because of that, school enrollment has increased dramatically. Now this is an 18-year-old kid who's raising money here through his businesses and spending money there to help others. Now, that type of innovation, that is really a product of a postmodern, interdisciplinary pedagogy that we see in our classrooms. And it's also, I think, a reflection of the type of optimism and hope that millennials have. So, I think that as we continue to be more, we push those disciplinary boundaries, we encourage collaboration, we'll start to see really remarkable things happening. I'm seeing things that I've never seen before. For the first time in my life, last week, I met a quadruple major. A quadruple major. I mean, when I was growing up, a double major was incredible. Triple major, extraordinary. Quadruple major, and this person had a major in like business, Japanese, you know, biology, and history. It was like 4 completely unrelated topics. So I think when we see that type of approach to education, a holistic approach, an integrated approach, a global approach, we're going to start to see more opportunities for engaging with each other in a creative and innovative way that doesn't look like the sort of, I would say, segregated and ghettoized approaches to education that we've had in the past. So, yeah. In terms of your first question, we have been working with partners in the UK around interfaith engagement, and that's one area where we're learning a lot from our British partners, in part because the social dynamic is so different. You have a longer history of immigration, in a way of colonialization. You know, the former colonial subjects are now represented in large numbers. In England, we say the Empire Strikes Back. We have a relatively new experience, you know, and from my own community, the Indian community, it's really kind of a post-1965 community here in the United States, whereas your community goes way further back. So when we think about issues of Jewish and Muslim engagement, or Hindu and Muslim engagement, or Abrahamic sort of reunions, we always look to the UK because I feel like you have a larger history, a more global, London is one of the first global cities, so there are a lot of practices that we draw from the UK in that regard. In terms of, you know, is this a uniquely American thing? I'd like to think of it as a Californian thing. I think on the West Coast we have a particular idea of possibility, of openness. We're not rooted in our own history because our, you know, LA is like, what, 20 years old? I mean, LA is pretty young. I mean, history here is 100 years. We're walking around seeing these old buildings. Oh my God, it's from the 1950s, you know? You go to India and you have a 2,000-year-old pillar in your yard and you don't think twice about it. So our history is really so, in California, our history is so young that we're not rooted in any kind of traditional approaches that I even saw on the East Coast. I think we think creatively, we think outside the box, we think big. This idea of what the West, you know, is an idea of freedom. We're global producers of popular culture. LA, Hollywood produces global popular culture, so we're very creative. And I'd like to think of that as really kind of a West Coast thing. But the reality is that it's happening not just in the US, not just in the UK, but all over the world. Millennials are very similar all over the world. They're connected with each other through social networking. They're more increasingly going abroad. They're meeting each other all over the place. It's not that hard for millennials now to be in Dubai, and then to be in London, and then to be, you know, in Los Angeles. So I think our generation of students is really pushing us to change rather than we sort of are shaping them to change. And the change is coming bottom up. And that's what you need for sustainable kind of change. So that's why I'm excited about being able to work with those students. When I first got to USC, I was told my job was to inspire the students, but now I feel like, you know, on a daily basis, they're really the ones to inspire me. I mean, that's just one of my students. Another student has developed a bike which he can make for half the price, and so he's selling it for regular price, and every time he sells a bike, he sends a free one to a school in Africa. Another student developed a shoe that can be worn as a soccer shoe and as a formal school shoe. So students could go to school and play soccer in the same shoe. I mean, these are 18 to 20-year-old students who are doing this on their own. They're not being supported by us, but they're figuring out a way to translate their own skills into something proactive and productive. And what I think is characteristic of millennials is they make things work for them. They don't work for it. So around religion, I've found, because that's where I engage with them, they're not interested so much perhaps in replicating the religion that their parents hand down, but rather they're interested in exploring their faith and redefining it in a way that makes sense for them. So they're redefining the world in a self-empowering way that makes sense for them. And by doing so, it's, I think, more meaningful for them. They're not just accepting things as it's told, they're finding out the truth for themselves. And because of that, I think they're more invested in outcomes than they might otherwise be.